Okay, Alderman Balmer, you can now begin the meeting.
All right. We'll call the Ways and Meetings Committee hearing together for this morning. Sharita, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Davis.
Present.
Alderman Buchanan. Alderwoman Hopkins.
Present. Oh, I'm sorry. I
Alderwoman,
can't hear. What's going on here?
I think all the mics are muted.
Yeah.
Alderwoman Hagel,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer,
What she do?
Spencer,
Hey,
Alderman Alderman Muhammad,
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. Here. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Chairman Balmer. Chairman Balmer.
Present.
Alderman Buchanan. Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Toro.
Those 10 bridesmaids you were gonna have, maybe you're not gonna have them next time you reschedule.
Okay, everybody here? All right, sounds like we have a quorum. With that, we can make a motion to accept the minutes of our last meeting from May 14th.
I make
Hello.
a motion to accept the minutes from May 14th.
Accept a second.
Second.
All right,
Second.
thank you. Sharita, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro.
Everybody's muted.
I'm sorry. I was muted, but
Alderman Vaccaro.
present.
It's a vote.
Is it a vote? Okay, then I'm sorry. My sound wasn't working, even on the roll call, so I'm here for a roll call also.
I got you. Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy. Alderwoman Murphy.
She's muted.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
All right.
Chairman Ballmer,
Aye.
11 aye votes.
Okay, it seems like we have everyone present, so there's no need to go through excused aldermen. We will now proceed. I believe first on the agenda is the mayor's office to present to us. Is that correct?
Yes,
Mr.
I mean, that's what I have on my agenda.
Yeah, well, I'm getting old and I can't remember my password, so I can't download my,
Oh, yeah, it's them, then the
Whoa.
comptroller, then the Board of Aldermen.
I understand. I remember how it goes. So, Mr. Conway, you're in the hot seat. Please tell us what you want, and what you're not going to get.
Well, at least I'm in my own chair today. So that works. So yes, we have the mayor's office budget. You know, overall, it is about $17,000 higher than it was last year. Our wages are up a little bit more than 1.5%. In the expense categories, except for what Paul Payne moves around, have all remained consistent year over year. We have done a better job over this current year. I think at this time last year, we lost Jay, Patrick, and a couple of other people back to back. So we have all of the positions filled, and it's been very helpful during our response to the COVID-19. We have cut one spot from the authorized for this year. As we go forward, we plan to keep this level of employment here in the office unless we have to respond to COVID-19 in a greater need, and this office would do consistently what the rest of the city might do. That's kind of, I'm open to any questions,
Okay. Thank you, sir. Nice, concise presentation. We'll open up the questions. Alderwoman Davis, you're first on the list. Have any questions of the mayor's office?
I don't have any questions of the mayor's office. I am pleased that the budget has stayed consistent, and it appears as though we are in an adequate position. And I shall also compliment on how the office has operated during this COVID-19. That's all for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice. Alderman Vaccaro, any questions of Mr. Conway?
They had me muted. So yeah, Steve, and I'm also going to explain this to all the E&A group. I'm fine that your office has gone up a little bit more. The ward capital being taken out of the budget is not appropriate. Now, what I'm going to propose, or they can fix it in E&A first, that the $5 million coming over, which goes to surplus, isn't in the budget. And I talked to Gerard about this. It does not make us whole. It would take $8 million to make ward capital. My understanding on ward capital that half-cent sales tax from Sharon Tyus tells me that by ordinance, that money has to be allocated. Now, I'm not going to argue that, but I am going to say that $5 million when we do the proposed putbacks, and they could do this ahead of me, that puts $107,000, almost $200,000 back in ward capital if we use that $5 million coming over, and is not in the budget. In other words, it's not set to go anywhere. So if you could pass that along to the mayor, I'm also going to let the comptroller know, because we can't ignore the streets, even though my sidewalks haven't been done, and I'm not going to go through all that. We can't ignore the streets, and paving and trees and dumpsters. Ward capital is important, Steve. So I'm just, don't want anybody to be caught by surprise, but I'm going to ask the members of the Ways and Means on the cuts and putbacks to put back the ward capital without affecting the budget. I looked at the budget. I looked at the different things. I mean, the police are funded, the overtime's funded, everything's fine. I'm fine with everything. I have no worries about cuts or putbacks, except the ward capital, and I could do that without messing with any of the numbers in the budget. That's my only comment, Stephen, if you could pass it along to the mayor.
So
So
I
there's no-
definitely, Mayor and I were both aldermen, so we both get it. Paul Payne is an accountant, and reserves are important to accountants. And that the capital is important, and I don't want to speak for Paul, but his
Well,
perspective is that we should continue to add to that capital account.
The
But
capital account is for
Yeah,
emergency stuff.
I-
We can't go another year, we can't say for a year that it's not an emergency to fix roads and sidewalks and trees. I don't want anybody to be embarrassed, but I am gonna put this over there. And they can fix it ahead of time. Or when I put it over, if the mayor, the president of the board, and the comptroller want to vote against streets and sidewalks, that's where I'm at. I don't want to surprise anybody, Steve. But I know that people in my neighborhood, we have more of a list of sidewalks and LED lights. And just as a for instance, I got 100, whatever that is, in the park funds that come in. I don't have the 25% matching funds. So I can't even get stuff done in my park. I need, in the park, we need the playground equipment. So I don't want anybody to be surprised if the president of the board, the mayor, and the comptroller feel that they want to speak against repairs in the parks and all this. That money is for emergency use. Emergency use, Steve. This is a good cause. I don't want anybody to be shocked. I would ask Ways and Means to fix this before we get there. I'm not asking for the full $8 million to put it back. And I also, from Sharon, and I know she'll come after it, says that by ordinance, when this was passed by Bosley, that have some sales tax by ordinance, by a vote of the people, said it has to go toward capital. Again, I'm not looking to fight that battle, but what I am saying, that 5 million coming over, which is not accounted for in the budget, needs to go toward capital. It only puts back 100, well, just slightly less than 200,000, plus the Prop P, which is 100, still cuts us way short. But again, E&A could fix this before we even get there. But I am going to propose that. And I don't want to embarrass anybody by asking them to vote against sidewalks and streets, especially at this time of year. So anyway, that's really,
anyone on E&A is going to vote against, and I think you saw the mayor's message and the president's message. They're going to be supportive of the ward-wide capital improvements.
I know. Well, I just don't want to.
So you're not going to surprise us, and I think you'll get a favorable outcome.
I thought that, Steve, but sometimes it seems like I do something and somebody are like, well, they blindsided me by this. I just wanted to be ahead of it. And I'm sure, the aldermen are going to support ward capital. But thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And thanks, Joe.
All right, okay. How could you surprise anyone, Joe? You're so stealth.
I
All
know. I'll mute myself now. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that feature. Okay. Thank you, Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Howard, any questions of the mayor's office?
I have no questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions of the mayor's office?
No questions, just a comment. I think we kind of, if I listened right, we heard a little good news in the testimony we just heard. So I would just echo the sentiments that, I pray to God we get some more capital money, because in my neck of the woods, I often bank my money to assist with major development. If it's something as simple as doing the sidewalks around it or whatever, that's how we kind of make things happen. in my community, and some of those developments wouldn't happen without this. So that's very important, and that's my sentiments on it. And in regards to the mayor's office, I commend you all on your efforts for trying to keep your budget intact. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. And we move on to Alderwoman Murphy. Any questions of the mayor's office?
No questions. I too want to commend the mayor's office for the job they've done during this pandemic. I think the information put out has just been stellar and accurate. And I appreciate all the work they're doing and staying within their budget too. That's amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Okay, Alderwoman Spencer.
See, am I off mute? Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple questions. I'm having a hard time with my technology here. The PDF seems to be frozen on my end, so I'm going to have to go by memory. But Steve, it sounds like the salaries have gone up by a little more than 1.5%. Can you talk about that a little bit? It's my understanding that yesterday at the mayor's Q&A, and I didn't have a chance to watch it, but somebody sent me some indicating that the mayor maybe presented that we are down, we have a budget shortfall of $100 million.
I don't know which question and answer. Let's see. Which question and answer period?
Okay, let me start by asking. It's my understanding that as of yesterday, the mayor's Q&A, the mayor indicated that we have a budget shortfall of $100 million. Is that accurate?
I think if you look at what Paul Payne gave you to start your hearings, in the worst case scenario, you would see something akin to $88 million. And 20 million of it has to do with the earnings tax, and that when the president and the governor extended the due dates on the tax returns, our earnings tax due date got extended, which pushed off from one fiscal year to the next year, 19.5 million. And and I believe that this calculation is on page 5 of your of what Paul Payne gave you, and it would be the bottom right-hand number.
Okay.
We are monitoring as closely as we can.
I do have to say, I recognize that these numbers are going to be changing on a daily basis, and what Paul sent us is now obviously a little bit old considering how quickly things are shifting. But if there's any announcements as far as what the shortfall is expected to be, can you make sure that the Ways and Means Committee, as we're looking at the budget, is kept abreast of those estimates as they are changing from within your office? It sounds like, I know that you all have a lot more up-to-date information than we may have. And if you can share that with us as we continue this budget process, it would be enormously helpful.
Right, and we get our information from the budget department. I know before having to do this on Zoom, that Mr. Bess or someone from the budget department was there every single day. But we'll make sure that Paul's group gets that information, or if we get that information. And a lot of it has to do with timing, when the sales tax returns are due for the prior months. But and the hotel taxes have different calculations, the earnings tax, the payroll taxes, they all come differently. But generally and historically, the budget director would do a quarterly report, year-to-date quarterly report, because not every employer and not every business reports monthly on whatever their participation. So I think we'll see for the June 1st, for the business license period, we'll have a better idea of how things are going, and that would come from the license collector.
So just as that information comes, that $100 million shortfall was the first time I'd heard of that. So I'm just making a simple request that as we are getting those new numbers in, we just share them with the Ways and Means Committee, just as we're going through this budget process. With the salary increases, one thing that concerns me, the city announced to our city employees last year that they would be getting a 3% raise. The budget that we received did not include any raises for our employees. I understand that there is, according to the budget director, some room for 1.5% raises for city employees. But if you could speak to the mayor's office raises compared to what we're doing citywide, it would be helpful to put that in context.
Our office will do nothing different than what we do citywide.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Can you help me? There's a couple of significant, and maybe these are small in the grand scheme of things, but it just sort of strikes me some of the increases in budget. The office leasing figures, are those necessary expenses right now? You mentioned that the mayor's office would not be changing its makeup or expenses unless we need additional COVID response. But those COVID responses, it's my understanding, are handled through a separate fund, that 30 some odd million CARES Act funding that is not described in the city's budget.
And the question is again?
The question would be, some of the expenses here, for example, increasing the office rental leasing, and there are some significant increases across the board here, or in some categories. I shouldn't say across the board, they're not across the board, but they are in some categories. Are these COVID related increases?
Could you tell me which one is an increase?
Looking at office space. I suppose that was actually in 2020. Leasing office spacing. It looks like we had some significant increases last year, actually, that are just kind of carrying forward. The base question is, are we including any increases related to COVID in that CARES Act accounting, or are they also reflected here?
There's no increases this year over last year, and there's no increases in our office expenses. The big thing are the computers and the copier just absorb most of the cost in this office, but there is no COVID-19 expenses there.
Okay, those COVID-19 expenses, and I realize that the mayor's office and other offices, other departments in the city are experiencing a lot of additional workload because of COVID-19. Where are those being handled, and how are those decisions being made to make those to expend those funds?
The COVID-19 expenses are being tracked in every department. Well, the reimbursements are coming from a couple of different directions, but every department has been instructed on how to document their expenses. And we've actually turned in 5 requests to FEMA already to date to reimburse us for the FEMA allowable expenses.
How much is the FEMA allowable expenses, Steve?
How much have we turned in, or what's allowable? Let's see. I might be able to give you that number. What have we turned in? We have turned in so far 4 claims, like I said, 1.6 million, 50,000, 70,000, 128,000, and the next claim will be for 58,000.
That's outside of those CARES Act funds, is that right?
That's correct.
And the CARES Act funds, how are those funds being, what's the process for expending those? And where's the decision making? It doesn't come through the Ways and Means Committee or the Board of Aldermen currently, is that correct?
The CARES Act funds aren't being spent at this time.
None of the CARES Act funds are being spent at this time?
That's correct. I mean, there's commitments that the spending right now, the spending, the two things, you can go to the transparency portal and see everything that has been spent to date. And who
That's not
was-
true. I went to the transparency portal this morning and there was only expenses outlined through April 7th.
Why don't you check now, Alderwoman? I got an email that they put it up last night. The last update. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman,
That's okay. You know, this is to really look at the mayor's budget and I can go
Right.
ahead and defer these questions. But since I had the mayor's office here before us talking about budgetary issues, I thought that what we could do is look at some of that. I will defer these questions for another time. I just think that as we're expending funds, we should have an opportunity to discuss those.
I believe that we will have that opportunity because I don't believe that we'll have to operate under the emergency orders of the doctors. Part of the problem with it, we have more detailed guidelines on what will qualify for the FEMA expenses as compared to the COVID-19. Right now, they have general guidelines. They continue to release additional guidelines. We probably will, as these guidelines, and they're all online, so you could take a look. It is very difficult, especially with the COVID-19. We have the federal guidelines we'll have to comply with, and then the state of Missouri has not actually hamstrung us with any of their state guidelines. But we believe that we should see some guidelines in the near future so that we make sure that we don't spend the money outside of the guidelines and we have the proper documentation. Because we do not want to pay back any of these funds.
Sure, the guidelines are important. I guess I was looking more for the process and if the Ways and Means Committee will have any involvement or the Board of Aldermen will have any involvement in the expenditures of those funds.
Well, I spoke to your chairman yesterday and they will have involvement in the expenditures because we have to go ahead and get some type of appropriation for some of these funds, even though the guidelines aren't there, so that we can begin to commit those and actually make some significant improvements as to the future for our residents. As the unemployment runs out and some of these things run out for people, we're going to be facing as a community what I believe will be a severe crisis in housing.
Yeah, I agree. So but you said earlier that we haven't expended any of those CARES Act funds at this time, and we're not using any of those CARES Act funds at this time.
You haven't written a check for that yet. You may be committed. We have a crack team working on making sure that the funds are being spent in the most efficient way with all of the different grants, not only available through FEMA or COVID, but the state of Missouri withheld a significant dollar amount and putting out their own grants. So we have a crew going through all of those and making sure that it might be applicable, what I have to do for documentation and how I put it to use for our residents. And but the check has not been written on the COVID-19 funds.
We have the check has not been written to the city, or the city has not written checks on those funds. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm just a little bit confused by what you're saying.
It's simple. We have not written the check that have actually gave out the COVID-19 funds yet.
So the expenses on the transparency site are what are they? What funds are those? I thought those were the CARES Act funds.
No, we recently got the CARES Act funds. There's a list of a variety of grants. For now, until we get something on the category that the COVID's allowed for. The comptroller's paying them out of general funds, would be a loose term. And then we will transfer to the departments the funds out of the COVID-19.
But we haven't spent any of the CARES Act funding at this time, or have
I
we?
haven't written a check. We've incurred expenses, but we have not. The comptroller has put it into a separate fund. I think the account number, it's a new account number she created so we could receive the money from the state of Missouri.
And then just for clarity, the Ways and Means Committee will have a level of involvement in the expenses, or
The
we'll just
appropriation,
remain a little confused on the process, not the guidelines. I realize those are going to be complicated, but just the process as it relates to who's making the decisions, if there's oversight, and if this body has any participation or role to play in those decisions on expending those funds.
right, the appropriation will come through there. We will put them in the categories that we know will be set up. Each one, the Community Development Block Grant, the ESG, each of these have different categories and guidelines. And so that we will allocate some style of appropriation so that we can get all of them in front of you at one time.
They will all go before the Ways and Means Committee of the Board of Aldermen then?
I believe that the appropriation bill will.
But that is after the appropriations have been made, or you said there's already been commitment?
Definitionally, I can't have an appropriation until I have an appropriation bill.
Okay, but we've already got commitments. I'm just wondering how what the process of making those commitments, expending those funds is going to be. If there could be some clarity on that, it'd be super helpful to this body and I think the public in general. I think we're just looking for ways that we can have input on the expenditures of those funds.
Like I said, the Ways and Means Committee will get an appropriation bill, hopefully fairly soon.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And we'll move on to Alderman Mohammed. I believe you said no questions from you. Alderman Mohammed. Okay. Alderman Oldenburg, any questions or comments of the mayor's office?
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Alderman Boyd.
Yes, sir. The only question I have, and I'm sorry, Steve, I might have missed it, but you said it was an increase of 1%. So what was that for?
Could you repeat the question? I'm going to turn my volume up just a hair.
Yeah, because I'm having problem too hearing. But you said it was an increase of 1% on your budget. So could you tell me what that was for?
So the overall budget was less than 1%, but within salaries, which is usually what people are very interested in, the increase was less than 2%.
So your staff had an increase of, let's say, 1% of salaries.
Right. Our staff got what the other city employees got last year. You would get 1.5% on your anniversary date. And then what I had told the alderwoman from the 20th is that our staff will do exactly what the other city employees do during this current year.
Okay, so I'm asking a question. So what I heard from Paul Payne, his recommendation was not to give the city staff an increase. So you are saying you all are not going to do an increase for the new year?
I don't know that Paul explained it exactly that way, but if no one gets an increase, no one in the mayor's office will get an increase.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. I was just trying to make sure that because I'm real concerned with the unemployment rate, the way it is, and people are being laid off. And so I want to make sure that we show some type of appreciation for our employees and hold on to them, even though they're paid below the bar. And I mean the people on the ground. And so I want to make sure that they would not get cut short.
Well, Alderwoman, and that's what the board did back in January, before we knew, or when you passed the board bill.
Right.
To lock in, because you got to remember, for the last 15, 18, 24 months, we've been dealing with a significant vacancy problem here in the city of St. Louis because our pay ranges were so low and the private industry offered so much more. And how quickly the world can be turned upside down. And so it has changed dramatically because our employees are our best resource. And we know it, and the full board of aldermen knew it when they passed that pay ordinance. And we may have to, I hate to be an Indian giver, but we will have to go back and amend that pay ordinance until we have clarity on the future of the economy here locally.
And so I guess my concern is, again, I don't want us as ENA Ways and Means to show that we're not supportive of the employees that we have and want to keep them. And so the only way I feel that we can keep them is we make sure that we find any way possible to make sure that they're taken care of.
Oh, absolutely. And, Paul Payne is a very cautious individual when it comes to the budget. I mean, I've never, seen him in all those years overstate what the revenue is going to be. But we understand the significance of our employees right now, and you do, and you know how we've, promoted them. And we don't know what the circumstances hold in the future, but right now we're not calling for layoffs or furloughs.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that they're not forgotten, Steve.
I know that, and I appreciate it. I know that some departments, in particular, the health department, human services, the police, the fire department, have done an incredible job 5, 6, 7 days a week for the last 7 weeks. And for that, we are much appreciated that we have such dedicated city employees.
Okay, thank you.
Myself up.
That's all I have.
Clark Hubbard. All right, thank you so much. Alderman Clark Hubbard, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
All right. Okay, Stephen, thank you. Naturally, you have given us what we need to know, and hopefully Mr. Vaccaro won't blindside you too greatly. So if there's no further things, we'll excuse you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a
I
nice
think we're ahead of
day.
schedule.
See you soon.
All right. Okay. And we have Mr. Shepherd here. Do we, anybody need a break before we go into the next session or with the Board of Aldermen? Are we okay? Everybody's all right? Okay. Thomas, if you'd like to make your presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello to the members of the committee. Hopefully, if everyone didn't have a copy already, I did send an email this morning. It's a 2-page document with a copy of our budget for the year. No big tremendous changes with our budget. We had submitted a budget. If you look on, I'm looking now at the TO. If everyone has that in front of them some kind of way, looking at the TO, we had our current authorization for employees is 48. We had requested 49, an additional position. This was prior to the pandemic and the, of course, the changes that's going to make to our overall budget and revenue outlook as a city. And so we revised that when we got the budget back, the final budget, we're back to our original number of 48 employees. All the positions have stayed the same. We still have a few positions that are vacant. Included in this year's budget for the staff and employees, if you look at the difference in the original amount for FY 2020, the salary amount for each position, and the FY 2021 amount, the difference you'll see, the increases are based off of the fact that everyone received a raise this year. So the salaries at the beginning of fiscal year 2021 are going to be higher than they were at the beginning of fiscal year 2020 because everyone received a raise mid-year for the Board of Aldermen in this current fiscal year. And typically what the budget director does for the 1.5% increase that's been given every year is that he doesn't necessarily budget for that increase. And what will usually happen is most departments, if they give that increase, they, their numbers made up through vacancies and other savings within the department. So it's that increase, that 1.5% increase is never actually budgeted for in the budget. The increase that you see from one year to the next is actually just a reflection of the salary increase that's already been received in the current year. Any questions on the TO?
We'll open it up. We'll start. Alderman Davis, any questions of Mr. Shepherd?
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Alderman Vaccaro, any
Uh,
questions of Mr. Shepherd?
No questions except, and I know you were listening at the last time, but also I want to make it clear that no elected official, no alderman got a pay raise. When you say, oh, the office got a raise, keep in mind that's not, and I know other people listen to these YouTube things. Same thing, I would say though, you need to let Lewis know that the ward capital, first off, Sharon Tias, who I know knows the rules, tells me that that half-cent sales tax, when it was put in with Bosley, and she sent me all the paperwork, says you can't, because of the voters, you can't take the ward capital, that actually has to go back. I would suggest that Lewis, and I also suggested to Conway, which, that E&A go back and correct this, or the $5 million coming over from the treasurer's office should be put into ward capital. If the same thing I told Steve, and if Lewis or Darlene or the mayor wants to vote against streets being paved, trees being put in, LED light speed humps, God bless them. Hopefully they're not running for anything soon. But the people need to have that done. It is an emergency thing. You can't say we're going to ignore streets and everything. So I would ask, before I even have to put this in, which I will, E&A should correct this and go ahead and make that addition. That money's not accounted for in the budget. So it's an easy pick. If there's over what 30 some odd million dollars in the general fund, emergency fund, this is an additional 5. I'm not even asking to touch that and make us whole. To make us whole, you need a little over $8 million. This wouldn't even make the ward capital whole. All it would do is give us slightly less than $200,000. And again, I can't even use my parks funds because I will not have the money to do any matching funds. The playground equipment in Lindenwood Park needs to be updated. The question I got was, do you have the 25% matching funds? I can tell you in my ward capital, I have about $1,000. So I'm gonna say right now, I would hope that E&A could get together and correct this rather than make me send something over, but I will send something when we're doing the cuts and additions. But it would be much better if they fix this ahead of time and we don't have to get into a big argument. It's my only comment. I read through the budget, all the different departments. I have no problem. I understand it's a very tight budget year. But the one thing that, you know, it seems like we haven't touched anybody's particular projects. Cure violence is still in there. But when you take away ward capital, and I'm not saying anybody took it away, but when you know it's not in the budget, I'm just telling you, it has to be put back. And that money that's not accounted for, E&A needs to correct that, or we'll just send it over and then let them vote for or against streets and lights. So the same thing I told Steve, I don't want anybody to be caught by surprise. I know you were on there, but I will make my same little speech. And other than that, Joe, thank you for allowing me to preach for a second. And you can move on. I'm sorry. Yeah, Todd.
Just say did.
I would say just thanks for your comments. Well, currently as happens often with the budget, E&A will send the budget over to the Board of Aldermen, and the Ways and Means Committee will deliberate, hold hearings, bring in the different departments. There's a long list of many cuts that were made to this year's budget, and the budget division had to kind of work quickly to put something together because all of this happened fairly quickly. So, I guess I would say, first, the part of the process that we're in right now is that it's at the Board of Aldermen. What E&A has voted already to send it over to the Board of Aldermen, and it's typically, historically, that's just been the start of the process. There was a deadline for the Board of E&A to get it over to the Board of Aldermen. So, we looked for there to be some changes suggested by Ways and Means, for the Board of E&A to vote on. But the Board of E&A can't make any changes to what was sent over currently because it's at the Board of Aldermen now. So it will have to come in the form of a proposed amendment from the Board of Aldermen in order for any changes to be made at this point. And that's not saying that the president doesn't support that change, but it's not at the Board of E&A right now to adjust it. It's at the Board of Aldermen. So there's really, not a lot, it's not much that the Board of E&A can do with it right now until we get, the process moves forward through the Board of Aldermen. And then, and hopefully in another month, maybe we'll have a better outlook on how the budget's going to be overall. I mean, the current budget that we got from the budget director, he proposed 2 scenarios. So we're looking at, we're just looking right now, we're just all talking about this first scenario, which, it may turn out to be a conservative scenario. It may turn out to be a pretty, rosy scenario. So we just have to see how it all works out. But I think the president has stated support for replenishing at least some of the ward capital.
So
but the E&A can't, vote on anything with the budget now that it's over at the Board of Aldermen.
So, Tom, I would somewhat disagree because last year Joe had to go back outside of the committee to put back things and worked it out with the E&A. I'm trying to put in my mind what it was, but there were things we were concerned about. So to say that E&A doesn't have that authority, I would have to somewhat disagree. I can tell you that I'm just so you know, I mean, I don't care if we send it over or don't. I would ask that they lead, but they don't have to. But I can tell you, if we don't do streets and we're not doing LED lights and we're not doing paving, these things, that's not, that money that I'm talking about isn't even in the budget. That money is meant to come over, it goes to surplus. Surplus is used for emergency use. Emergency use, that would be putting back the ward capital, which if you believe everything that Sharon Tyus is telling me, and I believe her because I believe she researches, that when this was passed under Bosley, that we can no longer, Paul can't take out of the budget the ward capital, that it was put to a vote of the people on the half-cent sales tax. They didn't want that money just being thrown into general revenue. So the money, just the same as the money for the Metrolink, North-South, all these different funds, that money should be put in ward capital. That's how we passed it by a vote of the people. And I will get all that together. So I would have to say, I'm fine with the budget the way it is. I have no issues with any of this budget. The police have the overtime in the budget. Everybody's pretty much where they need to be. You know, the place that I'm not happy about is the ward capital. And intentional or not, it seems like that's been a sore source for whatever, where it comes out, where they put out, and I believe it came out of the mayor's office, but whatever, how much each alderman had in their accounts, that it went to the press, oh, there's millions of dollars sitting out there that nothing's happening with, even though some wards have had to hold money because they got roads that are 3 times larger than anything to get something done. So my ward has a little bit less than $1,000. I can't get work done even in my park because I can't do matching funds. The ward capital has to be put back. And I don't want to, I'm just telling you, I will do, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but whatever it comes up to, the ward capital has got to come back. And if there's anybody in this committee that disagrees with me, I would hope they speak out, because I am going to be on the fighting side to make sure that streets, trees, LED lights, sidewalks, speed humps, the things that the people are paying for. Our property taxes, at least in the 23rd ward, and I'm sure through a lot of our wards, our property taxes jumped in this neighborhood by anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a house. Yet we're going to tell them, you can't have an LED light, a speed hump, or a decent sidewalk, or a road that's not all busted up. This is a very sticking point for me. I will fight. I'm just suggesting that the mayor and Lewis and Darlene Green be on the front side of this fight. I'm sure.
Okay. All right, Joe, I think we got the message.
Thanks, Joe.
And I think you have, at least 2 members of the Board of E&A that have agreed, so I don't think it'll be a fight.
Okay.
But thank you.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Vaccaro. We'll move on to Alderwoman Howard.
No questions.
Thank you so much. Alderwoman Hubbard.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Spencer. Yeah, mute.
Let me call you back.
Kara, unmute. Kara? Alderwoman Spencer? There you go. Unmute. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Tom. I want to thank you for taking the time to pull out the portion of the overall budget that relates to the Board of Aldermen and sending that in advance. We have a lot of documents, the budget documents, a few hundred pages long. So it's really helpful to have that and to be able to kind of zoom right into it. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that this morning. I have some similar questions. I mean, I think, Alderwoman Boyd brought up, reiterated the questions I had related to, kind of the raises for city employees. I want to make sure that we're doing across the board, making sure that if we're going to be applying raises in the mayor's office or the president of the board's office, that we, are reflecting what we're doing citywide. I'm sure that is the intention of the president of the board and the Board of Aldermen's office. And so just want to make sure that we're having some level of consistency there. There are some, it looks like we are pretty consistent with the year before. We have some additional expenses in office services. I presume that's to be able to hold these meetings remotely and that sort of thing. Is that what that is, Tom?
Well, some of the changes that you may see from previous years to this year are, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was due to the state audit and I believe this happened within the Comptroller's office.
Tom, if I could, excuse me, Marlene, would you be able, Madam Vice, I have to leave the room for a moment. Could you take over from here for a few moments?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
I'll be back shortly. I have to go downstairs and open the tavern up. Right back.
So here's what happened. At some point during the middle of this fiscal year, we became aware that for some of the expenditures, some of the things we were spending money on out of certain accounts should have been coded to different accounts. So we had to, during the middle of the year, transfer some money, put those accounts under our budget that may not have been under our budget previously, and add money to them during the year this year. So for fiscal year 21, we just started them off with amounts in them that they wouldn't have had in them in prior years.
And I don't see really any significant increases here, but and now's not the time to talk about additional needs, but I do think that our staff, I'm just going to say this for the record, really needs some training and would benefit from that. We don't have obviously the budget to do that now, but we exist in a world in which the Board of Aldermen doesn't really have, I would say, the resources we need to be a functional legislative body, sharing one lawyer between 29 of us. We already make do with scraping by. So thank you. I just want to point that out as we move through this. I'm sure we're going to have additional expenses on the communication side. I don't know where that's coming in. Hopefully that's coming in through the CARES Act funding and the funding for COVID-19 response and not out of any direct Board of Aldermen budget, but as we have to expand for this hearing and other technology issues. Were we able to provide all aldermen who needed access to computers and other things, those things without expending additional funds?
Well, that's a question maybe for the clerk. I know that there was an offer from IT, and I believe the Mr. Clerk contacted aldermen to see if they needed a laptop or anything like that. And that's why, if you look, as we started getting budget concerns related to the pandemic, under capital assets in our budget, we had requested $18,000, and that was going to be mainly for laptops, new laptops for aldermen if they wanted them. But due to the shift in how we're meeting and the virtual meetings, I know that the clerk at least worked towards getting everyone a laptop that needed.
May I, Madam Chair? May I, Madam Chair?
Go right ahead.
I would like to add to that. Everyone that needed any sort of technology was offered that when we were shut down. And I will say the clerk, and I don't know who else was behind the scenes in providing those, were, very amenable to making those available to us, and work with technology to make sure we knew how to use them. So.
Yeah, I commend that, because I don't see any increases in budget, and I'm grateful we were able to do that without any additional expenditures, and it's excellent we were able to do that. It can be a difficult task. So, as we move forward and need other communication access and things like that, I just hope we're able to accommodate with the budget without shifting any of that for that.
And much of this was brought up in the personnel committee.
Okay.
Of what you're talking about and discussed, and we are planning in that direction. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I really didn't have too many questions, because the budget is pretty much the same across the board, but just that consistency on city employees. So I have, Madam Vice Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
And
I have my, go right
I
ahead,
just want
Tom.
to follow up on the topic of the raises again. Yeah. So again, what the board does is, and that's the entire board of aldermen, not just the president and staff, but the entire board of aldermen follows, whatever's going to happen with the rest of the city employees in regards to raises. So typically what's been happening over the last, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years is that there's been a 1.5 increase. They call it a merit increase, but I think it's pretty much across the board. And so what we've done, and for civil service, they would get it on their anniversary date, but what we did at the Board of Aldermen was just give it mid-year, because that kind of achieves the same effect as civil service employees getting it, on their anniversary date. It kind of spreads out to where you get about half of the impact of that raise over the entire year. So we just, decided to do ours mid-year for everyone. And then that way you won't have a secretary who's been working here, a year, whose anniversary date happens to be in July, making more money than a secretary that's been here for 10 years, whose anniversary date happens to be in April or something. So that's how we've done that with raises. And then also I want to reiterate what the alderman from the 23rd said, is that yes, there are no raises for members of the Board of Aldermen, no raises for the president of the Board of Aldermen. And, and I think that's been the case. I don't want to misquote myself, but probably for the past 7 or 8 years. So that's it.
Thanks, Tom.
Alderwoman Spencer, does that complete your questions?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. That completes my questions.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have my list in front of me, but Alderwoman Murphy, have you spoken yet?
Yes, I have. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. So Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Oldenburg.
I have no questions on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Muhammad.
Can you hear me, Madam Vice Chair?
Now I can, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have no questions directly related to this particular budget. I do share the sentiments from my colleague from the 23rd. I am disappointed that that Warwick Capital is not included in this upcoming budget. And I'm disappointed in E&A for making that executive decision not to include Warwick Capital. And I am disappointed that the Board of Aldermen continues to operate on the on the lowest budget in the city. We continue to slash money and give money to every other department but ourselves and ask the legislative branch of government. I don't think that that is efficient nor appropriate. We expect every other department to operate at 100%. And due to us thinking we're saving money or being fiscally responsible, we operate at less than 100%. And I think that we would be far worse if we did not have the former alderman from 18th being our clerk. But I think we need to ask ourselves, if he was not the clerk, how would the Board of Aldermen operate with the budget that it has? And I don't think it would do a very good job. So I have no further questions or comments, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, sir. Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Alderwoman Clark.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have we missed anybody?
May I say something?
Go right ahead. Go right ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. The alderman from the 14th spoke to it that in the personnel committee, there's been a lot of discussion about increasing the capacity of the board to perform its function as a legislative body. That included the talking about of hiring some additional personnel, as well as looking at the budget in a different way to make sure that it best reflects the need of a body of this size of 28 individuals that handles almost 500 different pieces of legislation a year. That is reflected immediately in the secretaries and new secretaries. The board now has its first male secretary that it's had in its history, and we're bringing in individuals who are skilled. The staff at the Board of Aldermen work 200%. The problem is that you don't have all the staff that's needed. So we have to be careful sometimes when we say that it's not operating at 100%. The staff members individually are operating at 200%. It's just that it requires more than what the board presently has to be able to perform the function to at a level that could have the competency and is necessary in 2020. So you're beginning to see a few changes in the budget in that direction. It's not going to happen overnight, but even under the conditions of COVID-19, it is imperative that we've talked about in the personnel committee. It is imperative that the changes are made so that this board can move into the 21st century. I just wanted to add that in because many of us on the Ways and Means are on personnel, but not everybody. They've not been privy to the details of all those conversations and where things are trying to be moved to, even though I've sent out reports on it. It's not always, but all the material you get, everybody doesn't always see it. I just want to make that comment, Madam Vice Chair.
And
I thank you very much. That was much needed. Who do I hear trying to speak now?
This was Tom Shepard, and if I just want to follow up on that from the clerk, and historically for some of the newer aldermen, as far as the staff relates to the Board of Aldermen, we've added since from the time President Reed became president of the board. When we first got in, Mr. Terry Kennedy and Lou Golly's position was one position. So that was, one person instead of two. Gerard Hollins, who's been a great help to the members of the board, that was not a position at all that was in the budget. We've added the position of recorder as well, and legislative researcher, which I think we may be changing the duties of that. So we, began the process in the last, 3 or 4 years of increasing the amount of staff that we had. And we were still moving forward in that direction through the personnel committee for this year's budget. We actually originally asked for one additional employee from what we have this year, but due to the budget constraints, we pulled that request back. So, or didn't fight back when that position wasn't granted, I'd say. So we've been on slow increase in staff, and the personnel committee plans on continuing those discussions so that we can move this board to where it needs to be.
Madam Vice Chair, may I also add to that?
I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Okay. Unfortunately, we've hired, 3 more secretaries, Tom?
Is that right, Mr. Clerk?
That's
Mr.
correct.
Clerk, 3 more.
3 more.
That I think, they were hired right before the shutdown.
Yeah.
They really haven't had a chance to demonstrate their capabilities one-on-one with our aldermen. And I think we've done a good job. I don't mean to pat anyone on the back, but the committee, but I think we've done a good job of making good selections. I think we've discussed bringing those people along to help stimulate training with the rest of our people. I think we're in for an upward swing in the capability of who we have on board. And then once we get back and are able to interview the rest of the staff, I think we will be, probably the most cutting edge department maybe in City Hall. I hope. So I think that, because of this COVID-19, people aren't really aware of what lies ahead for us. And hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate that sooner rather than later. And that's all I have, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Boyd, I saw your hand.
I was just gonna ditto what was said, because I think we have moved the Board of Aldermen to another direction, which is exciting, because from when I came to now, it has did a about face. And so I applaud the clerk that we have and the president's office on how they're trying to take us to another level. And I think it's scary for some people, but change is hard when people are used to doing things one way.
Thank you. Are there any closing remarks that you have, Tom?
No, Madam Vice Chairman. Just want to thank the committee for their time.
I wanted to share in the compliments to the president's office, and most especially to our clerk. That I have before. I'm very pleased with that. And I think we still
Alderwoman
have
Davis,
more
you were
room
muted
for
part of
growth,
the time.
and it's going to be a big operation. Now we have a little glitch right now. We have to work differently, but I think we can even survive with this in a much more professional way. So, Mr. Shepherd, we thank you for your presentation to this committee today, and we look forward to culminating this in about 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Vice, I've returned. Thank you so
All right,
much.
sir.
So we've finished up with Mr. Shepherd.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and again, are we set for a break, or is the comptroller's office here? Anyone?
Comptroller's office is here.
Okay, does anybody, members of the board need a little break? Stretch your legs before we go any further? Are we okay?
Let's keep going.
Okay, we'll keep going. Madam Comptroller, are you ready?
Good morning. Yes, I am.
Okay, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee for having us this morning. You should have a copy of the budget summary from the Comptroller's office. Should be posted by the clerk. As you can see, right off the bat, fiscal 20 and fiscal year 21 are right there, pretty much the same. 10.3 million was the budget for fiscal 20. Fiscal 21 will be 10.8. That's pretty flat, but we did experience some increases having to do with the some line charges through the telephone company. The $15 minimum wage did affect some of the departments in our office. The gateway transportation was affected and records retention was affected. Along the way with the staffing, we've had some reclassifications, but overall we're down from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21. So our staff is down, our budget is flat. The pandemic has affected our office like it has the rest of the city. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. We have our staff on board to answer any questions that you would have for us today.
Alderman Davis, any questions in the comptroller's office? You done. Unmute, Marlene.
I wanted to ask a couple of questions. There's Madam Comptroller, I wanted to ask if you could explain process and procedure for funding that is coming from the state level as well as the federal level. I've seen all of the things that you've put out already online, and it's pretty clear you all have been updating us for the last 30 days on the expected expenditures. And you also gave us like line items in the 3 categories of the funds that came in. And then you also shared with us RFPs for intended expenses. But those funds, we need to have a better idea on how we can spend it. Explain to us if it's reimbursement or not.
First off, the mayor has a committee in terms of receiving the federal funds and the state funds. And my office does serve on that committee. And the person that serves is Bev Fitzsimmons, and she is here. And I do know that she heard your question. It was kind of a couple of questions you had. The last one being whether there was reimbursement. Bev can speak to that. And then you also mentioned something about the spending, and I'm hopeful that you can speak to that as well.
Okay, so we do have a SEMA, the City Emergency Management Agency, collects data from us about every week to 10 days of expenditures that have happened, and they submit it to FEMA for reimbursement. FEMA then has to approve that, and then it goes to the state for additional scrutiny and reimbursement, and then the state actually releases that money to us. Have we gotten money for this? You know, the majority of it is PPE or overtime that we've submitted so far at this time. No, we haven't got the dollars back from that, but we are constantly asking for FEMA to reimburse. So that's at that point. There are other categories that we will be receiving money. We did receive approximately $35 million from the CARES Act that has not been spent to date. And the committee is working on figuring out how that will be spent. There's different JAG grants, CDA grants, HOPWA, and various other granting, ESG, that will be used going forward. Right now, it's not like people are spending, you know, randomly on this money. It's that, you know, what we have spent, we are requesting reimbursement for. We are trying to figure out what the rule. I think the biggest challenge here is figuring out the rules of the game. What is all these pots of money? It's like, what are you allowed to spend it on? And that's very difficult, and it's very we're trying to unwind that before we put it out there, I think. Okay.
Oh, I appreciate your explanation. I noticed just a couple of days ago, even on the federal level, they changed the requirements quite often.
True.
And even with the banks and the process for the loans, they could change it every 2 or 3 hours. So it's kind of hard to keep up with it. And I know you all have a really, really a lot of work in order to keep us on track, understanding it, and keeping everything in its proper perspective. And so I just wanted to say thank you, because I do know that you don't have an extra 10 people to work on this, and you must be really, really putting in some extra time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm done, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Alderman Davis. Move on to Alderman Vaccaro. Steve, anybody want to take a bet on if we hear the word block grant?
Not block grant, ward capital.
Okay.
So,
Just
Madam
testing
Comptroller, you sit on E&A, and of course, it's the same thing I said to everyone. The $5 million coming over from the comptroller is not, and it's really not going anywhere except for into the budget excess. The ward capital has been cut out of this budget, which means no streets, no alleys, no lights, no trees. And what my understanding is, for one, I'm asking that $5 million, which we'll send over to E&A, that it gets voted by the members of E&A to put that back in as ward capital. Now, that does not make us whole. Whole would be 8 million. My other thing is, so I would hope that you support the citizens and their streets and trees and lights by voting to put the ward capital back in, at least that 5 million of it. The other thing, my understanding, and maybe you can correct me or someone can, but according to Sharon Tyus, who I believe, because she does research stuff, she said that when they voted on the half-cent sales tax, that on that ballot, and she's going to send it to me, the initiative, that money, that the percent of that money had to go back into ward capital. And that by not putting the ward capital in, that the budget the money's being misappropriated. That money should be going to ward capital. I guess if you have knowledge of that, you can answer about the ward capital. The other thing I would ask that you vote to put the ward capital back in, that money's not committed to anything, the additional 5 million that coming over. There's 5 million coming over from Tashara's office that would go into the surplus. And what I would ask is that you would support putting ward capital back in on E&A as we send that back over. The other question is, again, just because I know I said a lot of different things, is Sharon's understanding correct that that money by ordinance is supposed to be going into ward capital? So that would make, and if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Sharon's going to get me all the information and I can send it over later.
Okay, it sounds like there was about 3 questions. Now just start with
two
was it
basically. One, please support when we send over to use that 5 million that's coming over to put that into ward capital. To make ward capital whole, it's really 8.6 million, but I would at least ask that you support on E&A that 5 million be put back into ward capital. In my particular case, I spend all my money. I have less than $1,000. I can't even do money in the park because I don't have matching funds. So I would ask you support that. The other one is by ordinance, Sharon Tyus is saying that half-cent sales tax is supposed to be committed to ward capital and cannot be put into the general fund, which is being done. So one is asking support, the other is asking a question.
So the ward capital is created by an ordinance. And so what I would recommend is that the legal folks would give the opinion on this. Sharon Tyus is an attorney. And so to ask me, is she right or wrong? that's not really something that you want to do. She's an attorney and she understands, the law. So that's my answer to that.
Okay.
And then the other question you talked about was, would I support 5 million that you are saying that will come from, I believe, the parking commission or division. And I guess the alderman would vote to have that to come, because the parking budget does not come to the board of to the board of E&A, even though I understand there's an item, but the budget is passed, the parking budget is passed at the board of aldermen.
Right.
And whatever comes over in the budget that comes back for E&A, and if it has the 5 million in there to replace ward capital, I will support that. So I said it the long way, but I made it clear that the vote on E&A does not have anything to do with E&A approving the budget or any transfers or any kind of thing technically from the parking division, because E&A does not act, that's by law also. E&A does not act by, the budget or do the budget for the parking. It's always the Board of Aldermen, as it has been for years. So if that money goes into the budget to replace whatever's gone out of the ward capital, and it comes back to E&A, yes, I will support that.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So the way the ordinance is written, as far as the 5 million, it goes into surplus, like the 10 million last year. So rather than it going into surplus, well, that's what surplus is for. Actually, technically, I should ask for 8 million to come out of surplus, but what I'm saying is that 5 million, but I appreciate your support. And I appreciate your answer on the other. I do agree that Sharon's a pretty smart person. And then if the money has been misappropriated, even over past years, then it's my understanding, again, and I'm going off of what I'm being told, that money technically would have to be put back into ward capital, even the past money that was misappropriated. But she's going to send me everything. And so right now I'm speaking on something that I believe I'm right on, but I'll wait to get the answers. But I do appreciate your support. And Joe, I have no other questions.
Thank you, Alderman Carl. Alderwoman Howard.
No questions. Thank you for coming, Comptroller Green. It's nice seeing you on the screen. Have a good day.
Thank you, Carol.
All right, Alderwoman Hubbard.
No questions.
Okay. Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions. I just wanted to thank the comptroller for the concise summary. It's nice to, it was easy to follow. And thank you too for all your hard work. I can't imagine what all your offices are going through with this. So thank you. And it's good to see you too.
Good to see you too.
All right. Okay, Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Comptroller. Thanks for the explanation on some of the questions that Madam Vice Chair had. Those are some of the questions I had as well. And so that pretty much covers it for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Alderman Muhammad.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, sir. Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, Madam Comptroller, and thanks for being available. There were some findings a while back when the Missouri State Auditor did an audit of your office regarding some controls and reconciliations of logging, journal entries, as well as expenses that are submitted. I just don't know, I can't tell from the Missouri Auditor's website whether or not that those findings have been closed out and all those recommendations have been implemented?
Mr. Alderman, we did receive that audit. I believe it was 3 weeks ago, or was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? And we did respond. And as you look at the report and look at the findings, the one that you're talking about, the logging on of receipts and some of the reconciliations of that and some of the other findings, we have responded to each and every finding. We believe that we can improve in those areas, and we have begun taking steps to make those improvements. So this audit was a part of the overall city audit, and the state auditor issued that. If I'm not mistaken, it was the last week in April, or it might have even been the first week in May. We are now at May 18th, and we have responded to that. And those findings, I'm very glad and fortunate there was only 3 findings that we had since 2010 when the last audit was. So, you know, our office does work hard. We have a great staff, and the findings, we agreed that, yes, we can improve on receiving those receipts. For example, we receive, because we're in 2 different buildings, we're in 1520 as well as in City Hall. And when receipts come, they get sometimes put in the mail to go to the other offices, and it takes a few days, and the auditors don't like that. So they call that a finding that we needed to centralize that activity. And so we're working to have some of those rent receipts that we receive come to one main office and have one person log them in so they can be logged in a lot more efficiently. And that would get rid of that kind of a finding.
Great. No, that's good to hear. I appreciate your explanation on that. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Boyd, still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Any questions of the comptroller?
I don't have any questions. I just want to compliment her because every time she comes before us for the year, she always looks at ways to save dollars and how to reduce her budget to be in compliance. So thank you very much, and thank you for your staff.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Clark Hubbard.
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Madam Comptroller, thank you. You covered my questions through Alderman Oldenburg's questions, so I appreciate your time in your office. If we have nothing further, you're excused. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I want to thank my staff. Thank you, staff. Thanks for all your hard work.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone, I believe that's our full thing today. I apologize, I couldn't get my agenda. Do we have anything further on the agenda?
No, that was the agenda.
All right. With that, we will make a motion
I'll
to
make a
adjourn.
motion. So moved.
Second.
Entertain a second. Okay, we'll see you all tomorrow at 10 a.m. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Joe.
Hollywood Squares, here we are.
Yeah, bye-bye.